meetings this year, and I have to say, Liz and I have been overwhelmed with the number of people who've signed up for this. So we've had, I think, just over 200 people sign up. So we're very, very excited about all those new people who are joining us this year. So the topic is about energy in organisations, but I've also given you some tips towards the end about how you energise yourself, because that's certainly, when I talk to people informally about this, been a big topic for people as we come back into this new year, and it's cold and dark, and for many of us in the north, very wet.
Jan, can I just mute everybody before we go any further, because there's a little bit of interference. Just bear me a second. Off you go.
Thank you, Liz. So I got interested in this topic when writing our new book, Brain Savvy Business, which is out at the end of January. I'll say more about that at the end. And what really struck me was we kept meeting leaders who, and the most energized of them, seemed to have a really kind of positive impact on the rest of the organization. And we kept seeing clusters of people in organizations who were energized. They seemed to be kind of coming together. And the business results in those organizations also seemed to be good. So I went off in search of, what's neuroscience got to say about energy, and what creates it and what dissipates it. So I'm going to share some of those things with you. I'm also going to share quite a lot of the non-neuroscience research that's been done on the topic, and some of the links refer to that we'll come to. So let me give you something else more interesting to look at. You know who we are, Head Heart Brain. We work in the area of leadership development and HR process and practice, and everything we do is backed up by science, so primarily neuroscience, but we also use things like behavioral economics. You can find out lots more about us on the website. So let's start off with a poll. How would you rate the energy levels in your team? And particularly, how would you rate the energy levels in your team right now, given we're just back from a long holiday? So at the moment, most people are saying mixed.
I'm going to mute everyone whilst this is happening, Jan.
Okay, so most people saying it's mixed, that they have pockets of people who are energized and others who lack direction and connection. And I guess that's pretty true. And one of the things that the research finds is this clustering of people who are energetic. So if you've got a very energetic leader, that tends to attract other energetic people around them. So if you want to spread energy in your organization, one way to think about that is, how do you kind of get people together who are energized? But that can work the other way as well. If you've got someone who's very de-energizing, then they can tend to suck the energy out of other people. So what are the elements that we know from brain science that create energy? So the first one is our old friend, social connection. If you've joined our webinars or our face-to-face talks before, you know that social connection is really, really important. And it's important because it's a survival mechanism for humans. So it enabled us to, as our brain developed a big prefrontal cortex, it enabled us to actually be able to read the intentions and motivations of other people and adjust our own behavior to match those others' motivations. And that's what enabled us to bring up our young, so to look after our children. If any of you have got children, you know the only way a child survives is by persuading you to put their needs above your own, such as sleep. But it also enabled us to live in groups and to cooperate with each other to achieve more. And social connection, we know, is rewarding. So when we do things for other people, we feel good. When other people do things for us, it makes us feel good. And when we're praised or we're given positive feedback, all of those things make us feel good. And that good feeling is energizing in and of itself. So one of the things that we know is important for energy is the quality of the connections between people and the quality of those connections at a level of trust, but also at a level of wanting to do things for other people, so mutually working together and both supporting and being supported. So it's the two sides of that coin. If people have got any questions about this, please feel free to chat in the chat box. The next thing we know from a brain perspective about energy is, this is where I want to switch the slides, sorry. So how does energy get created in the brain besides connecting with other people? Because there's more to it than that. So one of the things we know about energy is we're energized when we want to achieve something. And what makes us want to achieve something is what we call the reward system in the brain, which is run by dopamine. So this is actually a picture of the dopamine networks in the brain. So dopamine is created in this ventral tegmental area and is basically squirted throughout the brain. And when that happens, we get that sense of wanting to pursue something and of feeling good about pursuing it. Now this is a system that was probably created to persuade us to seek shelter, to seek food, and to, you know, go off and look for things that kept us safe and kept us healthy in the kind of evolution of man. It's been taken over and has become a general system of reward. So it also activates when we see what we might call modern rewards. So things like some of the healthy breakfasts we saw people chatting about this morning, things like chocolate, things like a pretty face or a handsome face, and things like money are all activated in this system as a reward in our brain. Now, because it activates for all types of rewards, for all types of things that we value, it also enables us to kind of have what neuroscientists call a currency of reward, or a common currency of reward. So it will activate and almost tell us what is more rewarding than something else. So, for example, you know, if we're trying to make a decision between two things, that there isn't a logical, rational kind of difference between them. So if someone offers you £100 or the opportunity to clean the oven, there's probably some logical, rational reasons why you might take the £100, unless you're one of those compulsive cleaners. But if someone offers you you know, chocolate over a hug, how do you make that decision? And it's the sense that this dopamine reward system gives you that tells you what's most important to you as an individual, that hug or that chocolate, that hug or a bonus of £100, the opportunity to work in a startup team, or the guarantee of a big bonus. It's this system that kind of signals to you, you know, which of those is of more value to you. And in energy terms, it's those signals that will make you pursue whatever the objective is. So pursue your purpose and goals, if you like. So we know that people are more energized when they've got a clear sense of purpose, and particularly a clear sense of why they want to do something. And it's that why that is activating this reward system in the brain. And we know, and when that's combined with close social connection, then we get that positive energy in an organization that allows people to both work with each other and pursue goals. And it's when that happens that we get kind of that sense of positive energy. But what happens when we haven't got that? How do we generate energy around, say, a new strategy? And what the research suggests is, and what we know from our own observations, is that leaders can generate energy in two ways. So the first way, and the way we see most often, I think, is to generate energy by creating what might be called a survival need. So we often see this when leaders talk about there's a burning platform, or, you know, we're being eaten alive by the competition. So that is generating, that's generating these negative emotions. So things like shame, fear, despair, envy, anger. And when leaders generate that sort of energy, it gets people to be focusing on survival. The downside of this type of energy is that focus on survival means we stop focusing on other people. So we take all of our focus onto ourselves, and we're thinking things like, you know, how can I make sure I don't lose my job? How can I make sure I'm seen as doing a good job here? I've got to look out for myself. Those are the sorts of things you might hear in this type of scenario where negative energy is generated. So it's effective, you get a lot of energy, but at the cost of social connection. And for a leader, the downside of this is two things. One, you get a lot of unintended consequences, things like stress and burnout and resistance to change. The other is a person's brain is operating not at its full capacity because of the level of emotions. The prefrontal cortex is not functioning as well as it could be. And it's particularly not functioning in being creative and in problem solving. So it takes much more effort for the leader to be constantly directing people's energy in this type of negative energy scenario. So I'd be quite interested if people want to kind of put in the chat box, is how much do they see leaders using this type of energy in your organization? So how much are people creating a burning platform in order to energize people? The second type of energy that we're beginning to see almost a movement, I think, is what I call the creation of positive emotions in an organization. So these are things like desire, joy, happiness, empathy, hope, pride. And we see this when leaders set out a really clear purpose with a clear why are we doing this, and that why is to a bigger purpose. So it's to something that's over and above, for example, just making money, just making profits. And the sorts of organisations that come to mind when you hear about this are people like Zappos, who went out and, set up an organisation to be both positive, happy, and to have a clear purpose. So we've got people, to my question about what you see in your organisations, we've got Claire saying when times get tough, we're in sales, then this type of behaviour comes out from leaders. Yeah. It's almost like a default, isn't it? It's almost the way we've trained leaders. And someone in the NHS saying the financial situation leads to this. Got Linda saying burning platform is the norm. Burning platform is a quick way to try and fix a problem, and leaders don't think of the consequences. I think that's true. And, maybe one of the things 2016 needs to do is educate leaders that you get a quick burst of energy with this negative emotional strategy, but what are the consequences, and how much harder is it for you as a leader? I may be a bit cynical, but I've always seen people found that if you talk to leaders about doing something they're doing makes their job harder, they're more likely to listen to things that will make it easier. Oh, this is interesting. David's saying slightly different, but I once had a CEO who labelled people either energy drainers or energy creators. Someone was one or the other. Is that common? No, I've not heard that before, but hold that thought, David, because we're coming to that in a minute, and I'd be interested to see whether this guy's or lady's labels are similar to what we're going to talk about in a minute. So Jen's asking, can you have a negative driver and still create positive change? Well, let me go on to say, organisations that use negative energy, you can't sustain it for very long. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're hearing so many people talk about how tired they are. I mentioned earlier I was doing a talk last night, and people were sort of greeting each other, saying Happy New Year, and everyone was saying, have you kind of had a good return to work? And people were saying, yeah, I still feel very tired though. That was after having a couple of weeks off. And some of that is because of this negative energy. And what you tend to find is people become quite apathetic because they can't sustain that survival energy for long periods of time, and you don't have the creativity and innovation in the organization. So that's some of the consequences. So companies like Zappos are purposely going out to create this positive energy organization, which is a combination of a clear sense of purpose, a clear sense of why should we do this, alongside things like self-managing teams where people have to be connected to perform well. So I'm just going to go back to our other poll here so you can have a say. Liz, can you help me pull this over? It seems not to be doing it for me. Oh, yes it is. So, how would you rate the energy? We've done that one. Liz, where's the other poll? Liz?
Sorry, Jan, unmute myself there, sorry. Yes, we were both trying to do it at the same time before, and one of them's got deleted, so I'm just scrolling through to see if I can find it.
So there's an example
Here we go.
Negative energy and negative situation energizing you. That was panic energizing me.
The short term. Doesn't work for me. There you go. Exactly. That's the right one, isn't it? Yeah, we get it right.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so we've talked about, you can lead energy either positively or negatively, but how do you see your role with respect to energy in the organization? You as an HR person or as a leader, is it critical and an active part of what you do day to day? It's something you might consider. So, for example, you might consider how energized the leadership team are around a change project, or a group in the organization around a change project, and you think about energy then, but not normally, or you don't really think about your role in that way. I was really curious about what people would say about this, because I was reflecting of when I was an HR director and how much I really thought about the energy of the organisation. I have to confess it was probably not very much. You feel it, you know if your organisation isn't energised, but you often don't think about what's your role in it. So James is coming up with some interesting stuff that we're going to move on to here about who is an energy giver and who isn't. Rachel, that's interesting. Self-employed and need to control your energy, yeah. So you might get some tips at the end of this about how to do that. Oh, and Tim, very interesting, Tim. Thank you for this question. How much of a positive, negative attitude is a choice about how people view situations we can always choose? That is absolutely true. But we also know how hard that can be when we're caught up in negative emotions. And one of the things that the research tells us is that the levels of energy, both in individuals and in organizations, is contagious. So if you put people together who, a high energy person with people who are open to be more energetic, then you'll begin to build more positive energy. If you put even mildly kind of open to energy people with someone who's very de-energizing, you get the opposite effect. So, be very careful about how you kind of team people up. So if we go back to our poll, it's really interesting. Most people saying that they think about their role in creating energy on a day-to-day basis, which I think is fantastic. You're obviously better HR people than I was. So let's talk about some practical applications, and you guys are beginning to get into this already, of what to avoid and what to look for. So there's some very interesting research, and Liz, we've got the link here by Andrew Parker and Rob Cross, that looked at the social networks in an organization and how people were placed in those networks and how that impacted both energy and their performance levels. So their performance levels based on the performance management process that that particular organization had. And one of the things that they found in their research was what energizes and what de-energizes people. So people who tend to focus on problems and who are critics tend to have a de-energizing effect. Go back to our poll. Sorry, Liz, have we got a problem? Okay. They tend to have
sorry, Jan, sorry, I will keep muting myself, but I'm just going to mute everybody again because there seems to be a little bit of interference, so just bear with me a second. Okay. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so, and if you think about it yourself, if you're with someone who constantly is looking at the downside of something, it can be very de-energizing, and that can be a habit for us. Our organizations actually encourage this through things like contingency planning, and our accounting system looks at, and project management systems obviously often look at what could go wrong, but that's a very de-energizing, particularly if people haven't got clear goals and a clear sense of purpose. Frequently changing directions is another thing that people say is very de-energizing. And again, that's because of it means people lack a clear sense of purpose and any measure of whether they're achieving any goals. So they're not getting that dopamine activation in the brain. Partial engagement and partial attention. So people who are constantly on their phone, who might be looking at their emails while they're talking to you, who are doing a couple of different things in a meeting and not paying clear attention, again found to be very de-energizing. So that's the lack of social connection there. So it's sending an unconscious message that you're not really, the other people in the room are not really important enough to this person. People who overly push their own expertise, who have a clear way of wanting to do something and impose that upon other people. So one of the things we often see is leaders who kind of come into a meeting where the group are trying to kind of work through a problem. They bounce into the meeting. They think they're being really helpful because, they've got a solution. They kind of, in a big flamboyant way, kind of lay out the solution, or in a very kind of high energy way themselves lay out the solution. But in doing that, they take all the energy away from the rest of the group by just pushing their own ideas and having to sort of solve the problem personally. So those are some of the things that de-energize. Let me just go back to some of the comments here. So David, you're saying, or saying to Tim, I started the year channeling crowded house. Always bring the weather with you, as I think shared energy is critical. Very interesting. And then Rachel, you're saying it's certainly a skill to attain with experience when you recognize de-energizers for what they are, rather than accepting them because they are in a senior role. That's really interesting, isn't it? So we often kind of feel like, and that's one of the reasons why I think de-energizers are de-energizing, because they take our power away. So they take our ability to move forward and to pursue the goals in a way that's positive for us. So we've got Julie saying, it sounds like a really important aspect of helping leaders to create positive energy is them being self-aware. Absolutely. And getting honest feedback. Yep. So James, tell us a little bit more about how you prepare for a meeting when you know there's going to be a de-energizer there. I think that would be really helpful feedback for people. So let's look at energizers now. So, I mean, some of this is just the opposite, but let's see what the research says. So energizers tend to have a clear sense of purpose. And it's not just that they have a clear sense of purpose for the group. They're open and honest about their own sense of purpose. So they're happy to talk about what's important to them. And I think from a brain point of view, what that does is give people a sense of certainty and a sense of confidence in that person. And we know the brain seeks certainty. So when we see a leader who's very confident about where they're going and what they're doing, we find that increases our sense of certainty, and that's energizing. And even if it's someone who's not a leader, someone who's in the group, who's very clear about their role, about what's important, we find energizing. Because again, we may not agree with that, but we know they're certain. They're kind of grounded people. I'm just looking at Jasper here. With de-energizers, can we take the cat approach from NLP and behave abruptly and almost confrontationally? Oh, I don't know about that one. Challenge them on their terms and win them over. I don't know. I don't know if that would work or not. Any other views on that would be great. So James is now telling us how he does this. So knowing the kind of person they are and the way they work, and maybe more direct. Yep, So energizing people are direct. And inviting other people's opinions would definitely also work, James. And also summing up the meeting, yeah, really good. So you kind of almost gather other people's energy, other people's contribution by summing up that meeting. And yeah, all the good behavioral habits of turning the phone off. That's great. That little sort of summary there, maybe we repeat, if you don't mind, James. It's a really good one. So energizers also demonstrate their commitment to personal goals. So they will talk about their goals, but also show how they're making progress and create the circumstances for other people to make progress. So here we're getting both that combination of goal attainment and connection and supporting other people. They make good social connection. They tend to be people who are trusted according to the Cross research. And they support other people, but they're also willing to challenge, so they hold the standards of the group, and they're not afraid to say if someone isn't contributing or is de-energizing, for example. So I think that challenge is quite important. This isn't a softie who's being all nicey-nicey. This is someone who's got the standards and the, what that means to other people. To have standards. I think this bit's quite interesting. They tend to be high performers themselves, but they importantly attract other high performers, and so really competent people position themselves to try and work with them, and they celebrate achievements and recognize and reward success. So they're giving that positive reward to the brain. So I don't know how many of you get to work with people like that, either in leadership positions or you've got leaders like that. So Claire's now talking about matching in NLP. So now I understand the CAT approach. Yeah, I think one of the things we have to be careful of here, obviously matching is a very powerful technique, but you've also got to be able to pace and lead. So the matching is the pacing bit. The leading is taking them to a different position, to being more energized. And I think some of what James talked about are some good techniques to do that. So we've got Jasmine here saying, for me, it's about creating critical mass of leaders willing to behave in this way. I completely agree with you on that. And there are differences, Jasper, in how people get energized, but I think this combination of connecting with others and having clear goals is probably the bedrock of that, and people being able to contribute. So the Cross and Parker research, one of the things that they talk about is creating a co-created sense of purpose, so that it's not coming down from the top. People are filling in the details and creating what's it going to be like, how are we going to know that we're achieving something together. So let me just check there's anything else that we should cover on here. So Vicky's talking about, I've found matching negative behaviours can backfire as the individual doesn't recognise their own behaviour and then can just view you as being unusually negative. That is quite dangerous. I guess what I would say is if you're matching, you don't want to match one of the things that can be very powerful in matching that NLP talks about is actually matching the energy level rather than matching the behavior. So if someone's very animated, bringing your own level of energy up and then, gradually pacing that and moving them to the level of energy that's appropriate, that can be very powerful. Matching the negative behavior, I think, can be quite difficult. And because we know that's contagious, you can end up kind of finding yourself de-energized when you didn't intend to do that. So we've got Emily saying, I think there's usually a misconception that having energy and being an energizer, being bubbly, outgoing, etc. I think we need to also educate our leaders that energy is really about practical application and building an energized workforce. Yeah, I don't think energy is about, one of the other things the Cross and Parker research found is that energizers are very authentic. So, there's a connection between what they say and what they do. So they're not being bubbly and positive for the sake of it. They're being positive because that's how they're feeling. And they've, interpreted the situation in a way that they can see through the goals and move forward, or they can support each other. So energy is different to that kind of what can often be a kind of false kind of bubbliness. And if we go back to some of the research we've talked about before by Barbara Fredrickson, she's saying, happiness isn't not about denying the negative things that are happening. It's about how you deal with it. So going back to the point we had earlier. So we've got 5 minutes to go. So let's look about how you can create more personal energy. So seek out someone who's high energy and feed off their positive energy. This is the contagion point. And, back to the lady who was saying she works for herself, that, it's important to have people around that you can pick the phone up to and just talk to if you're feeling quite isolated. And, I think even though many of us work in open plan offices, you can become very detached from each other. So actually going and seeking people out at regular points during your day can be an important strategy. Clarify your goals, especially I think at this time of the year where we all kind of feel that we've just come back from the end of one year to the beginning of another. Having a clear goal and actually taking some steps towards them, even though if they're relatively small things, and knowing, what are some of the steps that are going to move you forward. Lots of the research talks about doing things you feel passionate about and getting in touch with things that are important to you. It doesn't have to be, your lifelong passion. It can be quite a small thing that you feel passionate about, helping someone else, spending time with your child, spending time with someone you love, going for a walk in nature, even just kind of, I find, noticing it's a sunny day can make you feel so much more energized rather than going through the day without even really thinking about the positives. And then working on something that you're good at. So when we use our own skills and we demonstrate those skills, it's energizing. We kind of connect with our competence and our sense of reputation. And then spend time with other people, preferably people you like, and preferably face-to-face. But it's energizing to be with people, even, in tough situations. One of the kind of most energizing times of my career was selling a business with a small management team. But we were very energized because we had a really clear sense of purpose in terms of, the way we wanted that sale to happen and how we wanted to make sure the other people in the business ended up with good jobs. So although it was, extremely hard work, it's still a time I look back on as a very positive time and a very energized time. So those are some of the things that you can do to energize yourself. Any other thoughts of things people have found work for them? And lots of comments coming up here, so about organisations focusing on this a bit more. There's a question here from David. Jan, why do you highlight face-to-face? Does that mean same time, same place? There is something that happens in our brain that's different when we're in physical contact with people, David. So although teleworking and, things like this webinar where we're connecting with each other can be very helpful, they can't really totally substitute for that physical contact. And one of the reasons why we do things like shake hands is that increases our levels of oxytocin in the brain, and that's another big plus point in our brain. So modern technology is very helpful when we wouldn't ever be able to connect with people in the normal course of events, but don't use that when you could just as easily get together and have a coffee with someone, or be close to them physically. And Claire, this is an interesting point. I think energy of presence is important and palatable. Yeah, and Claire, you're a very high energy person, so you live your statement every day, at least when I've ever met you. And we've got Penny saying, I agree, I think people who can be energy drainers, i.e. on email, completely different than face-to-face. Yeah, that's a really good point. There's something about being on email that disassociates the social connection, and means that we kind of say things and do things that we just wouldn't do either over the phone or face-to-face with someone. I got an email from a client over Christmas. Actually, I didn't read it until Christmas Day, and she's an absolutely lovely person, but this was a really horrible email. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? And obviously she was just having a bad day, and it came out in her email. But that's the sort of thing that we do when we're disassociated from that social connection.
Jan, we're almost running out of time here. Ash that's raised a question there about how do you get your manager to be more energetic so she can reflect this energy onto others. Is that something you want to now?
So I think if you're coaching your managers to be more energetic, look at that energizer list and share some of this research with them. It's very well-founded research. And if they only do one thing, get them to work on one thing. So if their issue is being very critical, get them to at least kind of get into the habit of noticing the positives. So I'd take one of those energizer lists and coach them around that. So Liz, yeah, we're running out of time. We're a time over. So my book's out at the end of January. We'll talk more about that maybe when it's out. Also, we've got this Brain Savvy Leaders LinkedIn group, so we can continue the conversation there. There's the link there. And then, as Liz said, give us some feedback on pay compliment. I hope you enjoyed it, everyone. Most fantastic chat we've had. And Liz, thank you very much for hosting.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jan. Absolutely brilliant. So much useful, lots of ideas, everything else. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody, for all their thoughts and comments as well. If there's something that's coming through now that we've missed, we will get back to you directly on email. And just to let you know, if you've not joined us before, we do hold these events every single month. The next one that we'll be running will be on the 9th of February, and Jan will be talking about consulting process and the brain, so looking forward to that. So thank you again. Have a really good January. Happy New Year again if you missed us at the beginning, and look forward to, as I say, I'll email everything over to you, including a lot of these references, by the end of the week. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jan. I'm going to end the webinar in just a second.
Thanks, everyone. Have an energized day.